And welcome to another episode of Real Talk Radio. I'm your host, Hillary Raimo. Today I have a special guest. I always have special guests, but this one is extra special because we're going to be talking about some current events. We're going to be taking on Jeffrey Epstein case. We're going to be talking about that. And we're also going to be talking about Libra cryptocurrency. Facebook has announced that it plans to launch Libra cryptocurrency, hopefully in 2020. And we're going to be talking about that and 5G rollout today with my special guest, Brooks Agnew. Brooks was born and raised in Southern California and joined the Air Force in 1973. He graduated second in his class in electronics engineering. Beginning his university studies at University of North Dakota, he continued to Brigham Young University, then to Western Kentucky University, and finally to Tennessee Technological University, where he graduated with honors in chemistry. And he also graduated first in his class for entrepreneurial studies at the Tennessee Tech School of Business. And he completed a master's degree in quality statistics and a PhD in physics. And he's here today to give us his thoughts on these important current events. Welcome, Brooks.
Thank you so much. Good to be here, Hillary. I love this program.
Well, we hopefully are going to love what we talk about today, too, because we have a lot to get through in just a quick hour. And but I think it's important because my listeners need to know and better understand some of different perspectives on these cases. And you look around at mainstream establishment media and you're not really sure you're getting the whole story. You're not really sure what you're missing. So let's start with the Epstein case. You had made some comments about this somewhere on your social media platforms about it, and I found them rather intriguing. So I'm hoping that we can share your insights into this important case.
Well, the issue with the Epstein case is it's really getting toward the body of the iceberg of what we call the deep state, or what we call, I call it the global syndicate. They covered their tracks pretty well when it comes to accounting. They move money through foundations. They flip accounts. They cross-collateralize things. Very, very difficult, even for the best attorneys, to unravel their financial world. But one of the things that these cabal members, especially the lieutenants and the generals and even the upper management, have in common is they all dabble in pedophilia. And I think that what we have here in Epstein is you have the blackmailer in chief. When I did some cursory analysis about 3 years ago on Epstein, I tried to find out how in the world this guy became a billionaire. In his bio, it said he was a hedge fund manager, but I couldn't find a hedge fund that he managed. He didn't do any trading. He didn't buy anything. He didn't sell currency. Somehow he went from being whatever he was before, back 10, 12 years ago, to becoming a billionaire and owning an island and several, luxurious houses around the world. But the common denominator was this guy invited heads of state, high-ranking political officials, and even some of the world's top bankers and lawyers to his estate, which is really not under U.S. Legal purview, but he brought in and I would say recruited underage girls and boys for this pedophilia ring. And it turns out he may have made a digital record that compromised judges, bankers, Pentagon officials, elected officials. And we don't really know how deep this goes because 10 years ago, when they tried to get him in Florida for raping Virginia Jeffrey, she brought cases against Ghislaine Maxwell, who's one of his main female, I would say, stable managers, and him. They made a deal. They made a plea deal. It turned out somebody from the government stepped in and said, look, you have to leave this guy alone. He is some kind of asset. I don't know if it was FBI or CIA or Mossad, but the court was going to leave him alone. And so Acosta said, well, look, I want to see this guy do jail time. He can't just walk out of here. So they made a deal, and he got, I think, 13 months, which was ridiculous. Now the state of New York has rebrought those charges combined with some new charges, and this time he's in jail and he's not making bail. This puts these heads of state and these elected officials and these bankers in a very precarious situation.
Do you suppose there's a lot of sweaty foreheads out there and people worried about what's going to happen from all this?
Well, you're going to find out tomorrow. Tomorrow, Mueller is going to testify finally before the Senate and House Judiciary Committees. Now, the interesting thing about this is that in the footnotes of Mueller's report is a name, and that name is George Nader. George Nader's mentioned a whole bunch of times, and he was arrested and convicted of trafficking in child pornography. And I'm talking about live video child pornography, the worst kind. He is one of the ones that got nabbed in this pedophilia investigation. Now, there have been thousands of them arrested. Hollywood, Europe, Canada, Mexico, and now they're starting to make their way to Washington, D.C. So, yes, I definitely think there are some sweaty foreheads. Fortunately, I don't know if Jeffrey Epstein will sing or not, because remember, he's the blackmailer in chief. He's very high up. I don't think he will open his mouth, but they're looking for the vault that has all these records in it.
You know, over the last year or so, we've seen a lot of headlines pop up about the Vatican and the Catholic religion and priests and pedophilia cases coming up in that as well. And now we're trickling down into Washington. And, I've known you for a long time. I'm familiar with your work, and I know how you see the bigger picture, and you go on into, the things of the world and how we're moving energetically. Do you suppose that this started with that investigation into the religious organizations that have this going on, and somebody is just continuing this on, or is this perhaps separate and just, meeting head to head, so to speak?
Well, I think it's separate in the sense that, and you're right, some of the headlines did mention these things, but they come and they go. When we talk about the mainstream media, we don't really mean the mainstream media. What we mean is like the front of the cereal box. That's what generally we see on the media moguls outlet. They run a story, the news actor reads it, and then it's done. But you and I, what we call the real mainstream media, the media that is really connected to the people, the true free press, we don't leave these things lie. We keep connecting the dots. We keep doing the investigations. And I think what really happened is when the bust was done about 2 years ago in Hollywood, they nabbed some very top people in Hollywood. They got their cell phones and they got their contact lists, and they began spreading out. And within weeks, they were over in Europe arresting hundreds. They were in Taiwan arresting people. They were in China arresting people. It was crazy how big this exploded. So I think what's happened is they've really found the soft underbelly, which is really nasty for this global syndicate. And, once you start down this path, you can't stop. For instance, if a Supreme Court decision comes and everybody in the world thinks it's a slam dunk, but then you have one justice out of the blue make a decision that's totally off of a pattern, but it fits what the global syndicate wants. You can't help but think that guy is compromised. For instance, when the FBI brings false evidence to a FISA judge, and I know if I was a judge sitting on a court and somebody brought false information into my court to get a warrant, and I discovered it, I'd have those people back in my court, and I would put them in jail. Well, the FISA judges, none of them said a thing. In fact, one of the judges mysteriously resigned when the question came up. Why? Because those judges are compromised.
It seems so obvious to me what's going on here. We back in the day when I was doing radio early on, And I was talking about some of this stuff as a conspiracy theory, the pedophilia that runs through the cabal and the crime syndicate. We were talking about this as a thing, and it was classified really as a conspiracy theory, one of those fringe things. And now we're watching a lot of these quote fringe things come out to the surface, and establishment media and investigations are going on, and we're starting to see some truth to this. In 2016, there was a federal lawsuit filed against Epstein and Trump. And April 2016, a California woman alleged that the men sexually assaulted her at a series of parties at Epstein's Manhattan residence in 1994 when she was 13 years old. The suit was dismissed by a federal judge in May of 2016 because it did not raise valid claims under federal law. If you remember, there was a man named Aaron Swartz who is no longer alive, but he did the world a great service, and he broke into the deep web, and he got into some deep databases down in there that had to do with the justice system. And he showed and proved and released online that the justice system serves certain entities. And I feel like this is another case of what's going on, is we have a system set up that serves people like this to help protect them from being prosecuted. The woman went on and filed another federal suit in New York in June of 2016, but it was withdrawn 3 months later. A third federal suit was filed in New York in September. And of course, this is all going on through Trump's campaign. And I was doing a political show at the time, and I was paying close attention, and I don't remember hearing much about this at all. So whoever does a great job of keeping their PR in check certainly did a great job. But what ended up happening with this particular case, nothing happened. She went on and she filed anonymously as a woman named Jane Doe, and she was scheduled to appear in a Los Angeles press conference 6 days before the 2016 election, but the event was canceled, and her lawyer asserted that the woman had received threats. So, I mean, if we're talking, and then the Me Too movement happened, over the last two years or so, and we've had a lot of attention brought up to the surface on these kinds of sexual mishandlings by people in big, powerful positions, and I still don't quite see any resolve. We had lots of great riots and gatherings, and people came forward and talked about a lot of things, and a lot of victimization handling sort of things. And so now here we are, and we're looking at another election coming up. And how far have we really gotten with these kinds of dirty secrets, do you think?
Well, it does seem this is an arena where accusations can be hurled back and forth, and usually it ends a political career. But we're not talking about, adult women who were, didn't like a kiss in public or whatever. We're talking about kids. Lots of kids, hundreds of kids. And some of these kids, of course, have been paid off. Some of them are scared and won't come forward. Fortunately, Virginia, Jeffrey, has come forward and has filed suits. And she was the one that went to his bail hearing and said, look, you can't let this guy out. If you let him out, not only will he flee, but all of our lives are in danger. And I commend her for her courage. But now there's one other thing. A lot of these kids are dead. They're gone. And I am trying to get somebody in law enforcement to take cadaver dogs out there and comb Epstein's island and look for human remains.
Do you think you'll be able to do that realistically?
Well, I don't know, because it's not actually U.S. territory, so it would be difficult to get a warrant on that territory. These kinds of things have their own sovereignty, and it's difficult to overcome international law that way. But the issue is that, these young girls, 12, 13, 14, 16 years old, you have to wonder about their parents. Did these kids turn up missing? Did these kids think they were going on a modeling trip? Were they paid in clothing? I mean, Ghislaine and Oprah Winfrey and, Mac and others, these were well-respected women, and women that not only young girls, but young girls' mothers looked up to and trusted with their kids. And now we've got hundreds and hundreds of damaged kids that have grown up. And sooner or later, this has got to come out. Justice has to be done.
Mm. Well, I would recently watched a documentary on the Michael Jackson story, and it was very well done from the perspective of his victims. And they interviewed one of his particular groomed little boys that he would bring around on tour with him, and he was very candid about what exactly he experienced. And I had the same thought. Well, where was this mother? And so, of course, she came into the storyline and was talking about her experience, and she was kind of starstruck, if not completely starstruck, with the fact that her son, Michael Jackson, was choosing her son and was mentoring her son and was pulling him into his world. And at the time, this was like the greatest thing. And she really believed that it was an innocent thing. And until the boys started to share bedroom space, and the boys' bedroom space became, one night, two night, a week, 2 weeks, so on and so forth. But she still didn't do anything. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, this must be happening to a lot of families out there. If all these kids are missing and all these kids are going through these things, where are the parents and what's the backstory?
This is a real easy thing to understand. It takes place in every small town all across America. You see mothers putting their daughters into beauty contests, and the mothers are just as much into the contest and just as competitive as the kids are supposed to be. And they're trying to get their kids, a multi-million-dollar modeling contract. If somebody shows the least amount of attention to these little girls, these mothers will do almost anything to get their kid that break. Not so much for the kid, but for them, especially if it's a person of means. If they're willing to give them clothes or a magazine shoot or a shot at a movie part, they'll do anything. I grew up in Southern California around the Hollywood district, and I was in Brandon Cruz's acting pool when I was a little boy. I saw the notoriety that these kids get. The parents will do anything.
It sounds like a whole system set up to just farm kids through predatory type situations, but there was another case in 2017 with Sarah Ransom. She filed a suit against Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, alleging that Maxwell hired her to give massages to Epstein and later threatened to physically harm her or destroy her career prospects if she did not comply with their sexual demands at his mansion in New York and on his private Caribbean island, Little St. James. So, see, you have a woman here, like a child, who's being hired to do massages, and then she's shipped off to a Caribbean island. I mean, I would have to think that the mom somewhere or the mom and dad somewhere would have to have some say about that. I mean, this is really, really orchestrated, and it's really a cancer that has spread across our global culture. So we're dealing with a lot of different countries, a lot of different international laws. I mean, is the United States justice system really set up to serve being able to expose such a global conduit?
It has not been. It probably wasn't up until, I would say, Jeff Sessions became Attorney General. Jeff Sessions has a lot of grandkids, and he's very, very protective of them. In fact, one time in a public appearance, Joe Biden reached for one of his granddaughters, and on camera, Jeff Sessions slapped his hand away, would not let him touch his granddaughter. So, yes, I think the Justice Department, when Jeff Sessions became Attorney General, this is when they started going after these pedophile rings, and thousands have been arrested. And I understand there's over 10,000 indictments sealed, but they're going to start going after him. Now that they've got Epstein, we're going to start breaking into, and I don't know about you, Hillary, but I don't care if it ruins Washington, D.C., I want them all to go down.
Amen to that. I hope that happens. It's a really, really, really bad thing. And what we have going on is, opportunities like this where people are pulled out of it and put on trial, and hopefully this will go somewhere, and hopefully he will open up. I bet you his contact book is really interesting. I bet you they subpoena that, and I hope they follow through with that as well, because we really do need to clean this out.
Because it's been going on for a long, long time. You go back through the royals of Europe, And this is, they would have a nice sunny spring day happen. They'd get the carriage, they'd go down to the orphanage, they'd pick them out a little kid, and off they would go. This has been going on for centuries. It's part of the oath and covenant of the cabal.
I don't understand the sexual attraction to kids. I mean, this is where I get stuck, and I'm sure a lot of people do the same. You have such an innocent time of a person's life where they should be growing and their imagination flowing, and they're learning how to be little human beings, and someone comes along and sexualizes that. Is this a product of a sexualized culture where we put younger and younger kids into more and more mature clothing, and we put them into situations that asks them to grow up faster? I mean, what is at the core of the sexual attraction to children? I don't understand it. I'm sure there's other people out there. What do you think?
Well, I don't understand it either, but I had 4 kids, and I just had another granddaughter yesterday.
Oh, congratulations.
I now have, a gaggle of them. And yeah, I'm protective of them. You bet I am. And I don't understand it. I can tell you that it is written in almost every holy book in the world that if you harm a child, there is no place in the universe for you to hide.
Apparently they haven't heard of our justice system. So we're gonna leave this alone for a little while and let that sit and keep an eye on it in the coming days and see what happens and watch it over the summer. And hopefully there's good people out there doing their job, and they're going to get to the bottom of this and bring it out into the open where it needs some exposure. Now one of the other things I wanted to talk about with you, Brooks, while you're here, is 5G network and also Facebook's rollout of Libra cryptocurrency. 5G is coming. The companies are setting up the infrastructure to put it in place. The bigger vision is smart cities where everything is conducted and orchestrated, and logistics are managed through smart connections. And what's your personal opinion on the 5G? Have you thought much about it? Have you got some insight on that?
I mean, I know where they're going with it. We have been modernizing manufacturing plants for many years because communication, from one person to another, from one department to another, and this is how we've made ourselves as a race more productive. For you and me, all of this cell phone technology and texting back and forth and moving files and pictures, and it's an upgrade for us. For the next generation, they're hardwired to it. They don't know what life is like without, being able to walk down the sidewalk and talk on a phone. We didn't have that when we were kids. It didn't really start coming on until 1996. So here we are 23 years later, and we're evolving as a human race. We're evolving. We're totally connected. So it's not just governments. It's corporations which have infiltrated the governments and have supplied the executives and the elected officials and the agency heads for governments that want this to happen. At first, it started out sort of like when you walk down the grocery aisle and you pull a coupon and you get $1 off of some laundry detergent. Well, now the laundry company knows who you are, what you bought, and they can then target their advertising better. And it's grown to a way of profiling you, not only what laundry detergent you use, but how you vote, what kind of hair color you use, what kind of gasoline you buy, what kind of books you read, what kind of movies you like, and this is paramount to this system, who you are likely to vote for. This is key, whether you vote or not. It's key to the entire system because it's linked to power. So what has had to happen over the last 23 years is the infrastructure has had to be put in place. First, it was cell phone towers. Then we went to 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we're getting ready to go to 5G, which is much faster. It is much more sensitive. It can handle way more data, and it can go all the way down to the appliance level. Your car, your heat pump in your house, your thermostat on your house, your meter on your wall, and your cell phone. All this stuff can be interlinked together. I see their vision. The issue, and I think one of the things people are trying to get out there to stop this, is the frequency that's being used for 5G. It's getting very, very close to the frequencies that resonate with human DNA. So right now, China is beating us. They're implementing it faster than we are. So in my mind, I think it might be smart to just sit back and watch and see what happens to 1.2 billion Chinese as they implement this system.
I
I
don't
hate
think
to
we're
use
going to
them.
know. I don't think we're going to know, honestly, Brooks, because China has such a clamp down on their internet system. It is so censored, and sometimes they can't even get out of the country to get to other websites out of the country. It's so compartmentalized that I don't think we would really know. I mean, there might be some data collected by some agencies that are entitled to be able to track that,
It's true. It's true.
but they are implementing what is called a social credit score. And I know, you're familiar with this, and what it's happening is their entire digital infrastructure is creating a digital society where everything they do online determines whether they can buy property or even fly in an airplane around the country. So there's some really hardcore consequences to what they're doing, and we're watching kind of in awe of the innovation, but we're also watching because of the
We're
scariness
involved with it. We're involved with it too because we have the similar thing in this country. It's called the Credit Bureau. Now we know it as the FICO score, but this is really your slave score. How well do you stay in debt? It's not if you're debt free. If you're debt free, you score badly. You have to be the right amount of debt and the right amount of service to that debt. And there are other things that tie into this. Your stability on your job, your arrest record, tickets that you get, bad checks that you write. We have already a social score in this country. If you don't believe me, go to a website called mylife.com. Everything you have ever done, written, said, had done to you is in there. It will freak you out. And we already have this in place. It's only a matter of time before these things are implemented. And by the way, if you make a mistake, you lose your job and you miss, let's say, 4 credit card payments, and then you get a job and then you make up those payments. Do you realize even after you make it up, that those missing payments stay with you for 7 years? That's a longer sentence than if you committed involuntary manslaughter.
I'm sitting here looking at mylife.com as you're talking, and I hadn't heard of this, and it's all about your online reputation and how you
Everything.
can clean it up or find out about other people, which is really what China's doing. The
Exactly
social
right.
credit score that they're doing over there gives people an ability to kind of vote. It's like a Black Mirror episode. You can vote 5 stars for somebody or a company or a business or whatever, kind of like what we do now with Google and other platforms.
And
So,
Yelp.
and Yelp.
You go to a restaurant, have a bad meal, you go to Yelp, give them 1 star, it hurts the restaurant. If you're rude to somebody in a grocery store, they take a picture of your face, put your face into the system, it pulls it up, and they say, this person was rude to me. That affects your social score. You lose a job, you get an F on a test, you skip class, all of this stuff counts against you.
So what do? You just have to walk around and walk around on eggshells and hope nobody dislikes you. I mean, we're in a world where that's very common. You can't go onto any social media platform anywhere and see perfect behavior.
I'll tell you exactly what you do. All you have to do is look at all of the Democrat candidates for president. Every single one of them has changed their name, some of them multiple times.
Really?
Yes, really. Mr. Buttigieg, his original name was Paul Montgomery. You go down through the list, every single one of them. You know who Maya Harrison is? It's Kamala Harris. All of them have changed their name. Why? So, look at Barry Soetoro, changed his name to Barack Obama. You couldn't find out anything about Barack Obama. You couldn't even find out his birth. You couldn't find his social security number. You couldn't find his selective service number. Everything was cleansed.
So why is that allowed? Why do we have leadership in our country where people get to hide behind fake names and unsearchable backgrounds?
That's a very good question. And I think the general public, and hopefully all the people that are within earshot of this station today or listen to the archive of it, will pay close attention, because I've never changed my name. I stand behind everything I do. I'm a public person. Everything I've written, said, or done is part of my life record. And have nothing to hide. But there are people out there who have done things and do need to hide.
Mm. Well, again, it goes back to having a system set up to help preserve that, all the way from our justice system to our leadership system to our public service system, don't you think?
Well, you're saying exactly the opposite of when we started this segment, that we should actually be sovereign beings, independent, and our life is private.
Well, I guess privacy is relative now. I mean,
Yes,
it depends on what you think or feel should be your own, and what you don't or do want to share with other people really still is up to you. I mean, you don't have to go out there and spill your entire life story out for everybody. You can selectively talk to people and share what you want. I mean, there's always that choice.
Yeah. And, all this stuff is being tied in, even to social networks like, for instance, dating sites. Dating sites now include questionnaires on your credit score. Do you know that 47% of men will not go out with a woman with a poor credit score? And over 60% of women will not date a man with a poor credit score. All of this is fitting together in how we judge one another.
And it's all fitting together for 5G, smart cities, and deeper control by digital dictatorship.
Oh, and wait till we get to the cryptocurrency. That's when it really gets juicy.
Well, for those listening, Libra is a permissioned blockchain digital currency proposed by social media company Facebook. The project currency and transactions are to be managed and cryptographically entrusted to the Libra Association, which is a membership organization founded by Facebook subsidiary Calibra and 27 others across payment, technology, telecommunication, online marketplace, venture capital, and non-profits. As of July 2019, the currency and network do not yet exist, and only rudimentally experimental code has been released. The launch is planned to be sometime in 2020, along with the 5G rollout. So is there a connection? I don't know. Maybe it can be assumed, but not very many people are talking about it. The Libra white paper has been released. You can read it online. I watched the C-SPAN congressional hearings on this very topic and was very deeply concerned, not only about the technology itself, Brooks, but the panel of experts that were talking to the congressmen and women who were doing this hearing. The congressmen and women didn't really know much about it. They were kind of just as lost as anybody else. They were asking questions that were, I don't know, kind of weak and not really what we're really trying to figure out here. One of the things that came up, and I want to talk about this in the last section of the show, was how it's a global company and how the cryptocurrency laws vary from country to country, and how their billions of users everywhere would have access to a cryptocurrency that isn't necessarily following that country's law. So the United States congressmen and women who were asking these questions were really only asking questions that were relevant to U.S. law. But they were concerned about what they would be doing over in this country or that country or, all around the world, and how it was going to be managed properly. And Facebook's reaction was kind of vague and not very revealing, of course. And the trust factor was the biggest revealing thing in the whole hearing, really, was that people just don't trust Facebook. Could Libra really work?
Well, it relies on two things. Well, right now we have over 1,000 different cryptocurrencies that are out there. Not just Bitcoin, but there are all kinds of cryptocurrencies. And most of these are like 100-story buildings. Investors go in on the ground floor and they get off on the 50th floor and they make money as the value goes up. because they're constantly exchanging it back into dollars. That's how we rank all the cryptocurrencies. You'll recall about a year and a half ago, Facebook tried to implement an artificial intelligence. And what happened was, in a very short amount of time, the artificial intelligence itself started to write its own code. It started to communicate in a language that the managers of Facebook did not understand. And so they unplugged it. They got afraid of it. In order for Libra to work, it cannot be managed by humans. It has to be managed by an artificial intelligence. Nothing could keep up with the transactions and manage the money supply. The artificial intelligence that will run Libra will have to get rid of the dollar in order for it to function. It has to create its own value base. It can't be transferable back to dollars because you'll have investors jumping in and jumping out all the time, just like they do with Bitcoin. We watched Bitcoin go up to what, close to $15,000? And you know what happened? The humans got out. The humans sold out. And then, of course, that crashed the value back down, but now it's back up close to $10,000 again. Only now there are way less humans in the system, way less. We think, based on the multiple attempts that have been made to try to hack into the Bitcoin system itself, that Bitcoin was created and is being managed by artificial intelligence, for artificial intelligence. They're buying server space. They're buying power. And it's out of human hands now. That's the danger of Libra. And that's why Facebook couldn't answer the questions, because it's going to be out of their control very, very shortly.
Well, why would they do that? I mean, what's the point of putting in a system into place that eventually could potentially create its own code and its own language and function like its own separate entity from having, because when people talk about quantum computers, they talk about artificial intelligence, algorithms. These all have to be programmed and on and off switches run by a human being. Without a human being, who is going to be able to turn it off?
Well, I think the real question is what is going to be able to turn it off? Because there's a central theme to this, and that is that it is a globalist power. It transcends all sovereign nations. It interweaves itself in all the laws, but because it's going to be so economically powerful, it cannot be stopped. And so it is no longer in the best interest of humans. It's in the best interest of the entity that's putting this system in place in the first place. So I don't know how to go there.
Could Libra be then the New World Order World Bank that we've been hearing about since the beginning of the century?
Well, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, they're the two most corrupt financial organizations that man has ever created. They built something that was called the Development Bank, which is kind of the front of this bank. And what they've been doing is they've been loaning money to third and second world countries for about 25 years now. And what has happened is these second and third world countries have gotten themselves tremendously in debt to this World Bank and IMF backed what they call an SDR, a strategic drawing rights bond. And what's going to happen very soon, probably before the end of this decade, I would say, is the foreclosures are going to begin. We're already watching it happen in Venezuela, so watch very, very closely. Venezuela is bankrupt. To whom? To the Development Bank, to China. And China is moving into Venezuela right now to collect on the debt.
Well, they could collect on our debt too. I mean, they own a lot of the world. It's not like this couldn't happen in other people's countries too. So we really have to protect our children. We have to protect our privacy. We have to protect our finances. I mean, who's in charge here? Do you think Trump is doing the best he can to be able to navigate a lot of this darkness that exists on our planet in the forms of these things?
Well, he understands the financial end and I think the foreign policy end better than anybody because he just doesn't have this what do you call um, um, colonialist idea. He doesn't want to rule the world. But that being said, it's been set up over a long, long time. During the Clinton presidency, the Bush presidency, and the Obama presidency, we mortgaged a lot of stuff in our country. There are now 770 million acres of American land that is controlled by the BLM through the Department of the Interior. Why? Because it's all been mortgaged. It's all been mortgaged to the Chinese. Now, currently, right now, we're making the payments. But if something happens, if our economy falters and we stop making those payments, China will foreclose and we'll lose our national parks, our forests, our underground aquifers, our highway system, our grid, our ports, all of which are mortgaged by China.
Feels so hopeless when you talk about it like this. What can you say to people to give them hope from such a dire situation?
Well, the hope is that there is awareness. The administration is aware of this. When I went to Trump Tower during transition, it was like it was a little bit chaotic to say the least, but they were working on it. And Steve Bannon and others were overwhelmed by it because they saw what had been set up the previous 30 years, and they actually didn't think they could take it apart in 8 years. It was almost overwhelming. But I'm really amazed at the amount of progress that they have made. Fortunately, a lot of these guys chose the wise path and they got out of the administration so they could get out in the public, like me, with our hands on our weapons where we could actually do something instead of stuck inside the administration where we can't do anything.
Well, let's talk about you for a bit. Tell us more about what your work is in the world and how you got into a position where you can talk about such things.
Well, I was one of the top math students in the country, and I was actually hired by the 84th largest corporation in the world 6 months before I graduated college. So when I got out, I was on a very fast track. I worked on the mathematics of setting up some patents, working on some divestitures of non-core businesses for some of these large corporations. I've worked with the Fortune 500 now for almost 30 years. And so my job is to find out where they're leaking money, find out where they're not productive, find out what scientific or engineering processes aren't working, either fix them or dump them. And so that's what I've been doing. And during transition, I went to Trump Tower to talk to them about the future of energy. And that's where I learned that they were going to put Rick Perry in charge of the Department of Energy. It was a source of enormous corruption during the Obama administration. And ever since Rick has been in there, we've had, as far as I know, zero corruption. I followed the Federal Register pretty closely, at least with respect to the DOE, and I haven't found $1 of money laundering going on in the DOE. We had $23.5 billion in 3 years of the Obama presidency. It was horrendous.
So what is the vision of the energy world in this country coming in? Because I watched some of the legislation get passed that Trump proves that really does seem to harm our environment. So it kind of goes against this sight that I have, with hope that our leadership would move us into a better situation with our environment. So what is the plan for the energy? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I can. I started developing what's called the dry process biodiesel plant for the state of Washington under the Energy Freedom Fund. I got that done, and then I ran up against the EPA. They wrote a series of letters and stopped the biodiesel industry dead in its tracks. So what we're doing right now is we're taking advantage of reserves that have been placed in the earth, we think, by Mother Nature for us. Are we going to live on them forever? Absolutely not. We're using them in the short end to get out from underneath this global foot that we've been under. At one time, we imported 64% of the oil that was used to make fuel in this country. Now we import none. We have now also, because of the extra tax money that's coming in, not only from highway use, but also the refinement and distribution of petroleum products that we own, we're investing in other forms of energy. We're working on cold fusion. We're working on helium-3, which there's a tremendous amount of reserve of this on the moon. It's difficult to get to here in this planet because most of the helium-3 comes from volcanoes. But we don't want to mine volcanoes. We want to do it easier. So we had to get private industry involved in this process. We just couldn't do it with government. And you couldn't do it with incentives. You can't do it by subsidizing solar or subsidizing wind. It has to make it on its own. And that's exactly what private industry is doing. Private industry is now getting into space in a big way. It's now getting into mining ocean floors, which are a huge reserve that we have, especially of rare metals. And slowly but surely, we're going to back our way out of shoveling our planet into our gas tanks and burning it. Not because government's going to force it, but because private industry is going to make it happen.
Well, how much is given to the thought of the environment in the process of all that? When you're mining ocean floors, there is risk involved as far as marine life. How do they protect that?
Well, I mean, there's no marine life past about 1,000 feet in the ocean. All the marine life is up where the sunlight is. We're talking about 18,000 foot deep oceans, tremendous, like yards and yards and yards, over thousands of square miles of metals that have dropped to our planet from space. They've hit the ocean, they've sunk to the bottom, and they're just sitting there. And there's vanadium, of course, there's iron, there's chromium, all kinds of metals that are very difficult and very expensive and very unsafe to mine on the surface. But we can mine all this with robots from the bottom of the ocean, bring it to the surface in very high purity, and work with it from there. And I think it's going to be the wave of the next 500 years. After that, we're going to start mining asteroids. We'll find asteroids of vanadium. We'll find asteroids of gold. We'll find asteroids of titanium. And the good news is we don't need to bring all that metal back to Earth. We can bring that metal back to orbiting factories or to lunar factories and turn it into what we need to continue to provide Earth with a future. This is the future. This is where we're going.
Innovation, I guess. Is this why Trump has made the call for a space force?
Not exactly. The Space Force was necessary because the Pentagon and the Air Force specifically had become so political. He couldn't fix it in 8 years. When Obama was on his way out, he deactivated the Second Fleet, which left the entire northeast of the United States unguarded. He also took apart the TARP systems, which are the tethered active radar systems that protected our southern border. So all of this happened because the Defense Department had become so politicized and it was leaking money, like trillions of dollars. So Trump said, I can't fix it. So I'm going to develop a new division of defense. And he went back to the Second Fleet, reactivated the Second Fleet. He put the TARP system back in place, and he started pulling all these flag officers that had been fired over the last 10 years. These flag officers have battle experience, and they will defend America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And he's forming this new force that will protect America instead of protect the globalists.
Well, you don't hear this on CNN, do you, Brooks?
Absolutely not. It's not so bad in the Navy, but the Air Force and the Pentagon, I've been to the Pentagon many times, it is full of politics. By the time you get 4 stars on your shoulder, you are deep in the politics. This is what he's trying to overcome.
Boy. Well, you also have written many books, gone on to become bestsellers, and you do a radio show. Tell us about that in the last few minutes.
All right. I have 10 books in print. They're all about the origin and destiny of the Earth. Starts out with the Arc of Millions of Years, and it culminates in a trilogy that I wrote called the Birth Trilogy, which we're now trying to bring to a TV series. My weekly show is every Sunday night from 8 to 11 p.m. It's called X Squared Radio. We've been on the air for 15 years, and we go out on iHeart, TuneIn. Of course, we're live at truthfrequencyradio.com, and I've recently added Facebook Live to that because I had a difficult time with YouTube lately.
Well, you and many other people, and plus Facebook is taking over the world, so what better way to reach people? Unless they don't like you and they set their algorithms on your content and you don't get into anybody's feeds, but who's watching anyway? So tell us, Brooks, what's your vision for all of this? We've talked about a lot in this last hour. We've gone through quite a bit of information and topics. How do you see the world moving forward? What is your vision?
Well, I see that this generation, especially the next generation, we have probably the most amazing intellect being born right now on this planet. And I would think for the last 100 years, that intellect has been suppressed and it's been oppressed. Since 1933, in this country, we have developed probably one of the most powerful fascist governments the world has ever known. Every agency, department, bureau, and administration is run by some corporate executive, and we have no representation in that government. Right now, we are working on a thing called the Convention of States, which will allow the states to set the record back the way it should be, that it's government of, for, and by the people. When that happens, it's not the government that's going to save this world. It's us. We're the ones with the intellect. We're the ones with the ideas. We're the ones with the new energy devices, the storage devices, the mechanical devices that will change the world. All we need is for government to get out of our way, and we can do it.
Well, that's great vision. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Brooks, for joining me this past hour. And anybody wants to find out more information about him and his work can go to brooksagnew.blog and read all about the great work he's doing out in the world. And if you'd like to contact him or have him on your show, it's all right there. Thank you very much, Brooks.
Thank you, Hillary.
Well, there you have it, guys. We covered a lot of ground. Libra cryptocurrency is coming, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they implement that and what happens with the Epstein case. So until then, be free, be yourself. This is Real Talk Radio. I'm Hillary Raimo.